For 5 years straight, I paid the mortgage on my parents' house. Quietly, consistently. No missed payments, no questions asked. I fixed their leaking roof. I repainted the porch. I even covered the property tax when they forgot. They called me their rock, their responsible one, and I believed that meant something. Then one afternoon, I saw a photo online. My sister, holding a glass of champagne, standing in front of that house, the house I'd been keeping afloat, beaming like she just won the lottery. The caption read, "Our forever home. Thanks, Mom and Dad." No heads up, no call, not even a text. Just a public announcement that the deed, the home I paid for, was now hers. I laughed. Then I cried. And then I realized I had the receipts. All of them. So if they wanted to erase me from the story, fine. But I was done being the one who quietly kept it all together while they handed credit and keys to someone else. And what came next? Well, they never saw me coming. I'm Savannah. I used to think doing the right thing would eventually speak for itself. But sometimes it doesn't matter how much you give, if the people you're giving to never plan to remember. This is what happened when I finally stopped asking for a seat at the table and started showing them who really owned the house. Before I share my story, I'd love to know you are here with me and listening to me. Comment hearing below or tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes knowing someone is there makes all the difference. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Savannah Monroe. I'm 38, and if you were to ask anyone in town about me, they'd probably say, "Oh, Savannah? She runs that little auto shop off Highway 78. Always covered in grease, never late on a bill." I'm not flashy. I don't do girls' weekends or post latte photos online. I fix cars, keep my head down, and go home to a modest house I've been patching up for years. One pipe, one roof tile, one paycheck at a time. 5 years ago, my father, Russell, had a stroke. 1 minute he was mowing the lawn, and the next, he was in a hospital bed, unable to move the left side of his body. My mother, Colleen, had to quit her job at the community center to take care of him full-time. The mortgage payments started piling up like fallen leaves no one had time to rake. I didn't think twice. One sweltering afternoon in late July, I walked into the bank and said I'd take over the mortgage. I didn't ask my parents to sign anything. No contracts, no witnesses. Just a promise from my mother, voice cracking as she hugged me in the parking lot. "You're holding on to the family's legacy, honey. This house, it'll be yours one day." I believed her. Every month since, I've sent $1,220 to the bank without fail. I fixed the leaky roof, replaced the plumbing in the kitchen, even resodded the backyard when Dad needed wheelchair access. All out of pocket. No complaints. I never brought it up at dinner, never held it over anyone's head. I figured love didn't need receipts. My sister Chelsea had already moved to Charlotte by then. MBA, married to Derek, a guy who wears loafers without socks, and blessed with 2 kids, a granite countertop kitchen, and a perfect holiday card smile. She only came home for holidays, bearing expensive gifts and taking up all the oxygen in the room. Whenever she walked in, the whole house lit up. Mom would beam, Dad would chuckle, and I'd be the one taking coats, checking on the roast, making sure the ice didn't melt. Nobody asked how the shop was doing. They asked if I was still seeing anyone, or if I'd finally gotten around to repainting the living room like Chelsea had suggested 2 years ago. There are no framed pictures of me on the hallway wall, just Chelsea's wedding, Chelsea's first kid, Chelsea at her company gala. Sometimes I'd catch myself wiping my hands on a greasy rag, staring at those photos, wondering if I was just background noise in my own family story. Still, I kept going. I thought, this is what it means to show up, to stay, to carry the weight when others can't. I told myself the house would be mine someday, not because I demanded it, but because I'd earned it, brick by brick, month by month. That was the deal I made in my head. It never occurred to me that no one else had signed it. Chelsea never offered help with the mortgage, not once. But every Christmas she brought back stories of investment portfolios and corporate retreats, smiling like she had the world in her purse. And still, my mother would clasp her hands and say, "Isn't she just remarkable?" Meanwhile, I was in the backyard unclogging the gutters. That summer afternoon at the bank feels like a lifetime ago. I remember the way the heat shimmered off the asphalt as I signed the paperwork, hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of stepping into something permanent. I thought I was saving the house. I thought I was saving us. Now, looking back, I see it more clearly. That was the moment I stopped being a daughter and started being a safety net. I wasn't the one they celebrated. I was the one they leaned on and forgot to thank. No legal documents, no deed in my name, just a promise, floating in the air like steam off a summer sidewalk, warm, comforting, and destined to vanish the second the wind changed. And oh, how it would change. Thanksgiving always came with a kind of ache I couldn't quite name. It was like stepping into a movie where everyone else knew their lines except me. Still, I showed up. Early, like always. I brought the cranberry sauce in my mom's chipped blue ceramic bowl, the one she used every year since I was little. I took off my jacket in the laundry room, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work. The turkey was still defrosting when I arrived. I basted it. I chopped vegetables. I ran to the store when we ran out of cinnamon. Mom fluttered around the kitchen, but her mind was somewhere else. On the centerpiece Chelsea said she'd send from Charlotte, on whether the wine was the right vintage for Derek, on which china to use so it wouldn't look too plain. By the time Chelsea and Derek arrived, 2 hours late of course, the house had already started to smell like home. She walked in like a celebrity stepping onto a red carpet, hair curled to perfection, carrying matching monogrammed gift bags like she was hosting the Oscars, not visiting her childhood house. Derek trailed behind, sunglasses still on, holding a bottle of Napa Valley something and 2 screaming kids glued to iPads. Mom's eyes lit up like she'd seen a miracle. "Oh, sweetie, you're glowing. That jacket's so chic," she said, fussing over Chelsea's collar while completely missing the burn on my forearm from the oven. They handed out hugs like party favors. Derek gave Dad a half handshake and then kissed Mom on the cheek. Meanwhile, I was still in the kitchen, stirring gravy, pretending the lump in my throat was just from the onions. Dinner was called. Plates were laid out, silverware aligned. 10 seats at the main dining table. 2 more than usual, I noticed. But when I walked over, one of the kids was already climbing onto the chair I always sat in. My mother looked up and smiled. "Savvy, would you mind sitting in the kitchen this year? You're closer to the food anyway. It'll be easier for everyone." Closer to the food. I nodded, pretending not to notice the chair they set up for me next to the recycling bin. It wobbled. The seat was sticky. I wiped it with my sleeve. They laughed inside. Toasts were raised. And then Dad stood. I hadn't heard that man speak above a whisper in months, but now he cleared his throat like he was about to announce a royal decree. "I just want to say how grateful we are to have our family together," he said. "And we've decided it's time to make things easier for Chelsea and Derek. So, we're putting the house in their name. That way, they always have a place to come back to for the holidays. A real home base." Applause. Smiles. Derek clapped him on the back. Chelsea wiped away a tear. No one looked at me. I sat there, in the kitchen, a spoon in one hand and an unopened soda in the other, as if I were some kind of hired help. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I just let it settle into my bones like cold air creeping through a cracked window. They had given away the house I had kept standing. After dessert, some overpriced pie Chelsea brought from an organic bakery, I started clearing the table. They were too busy reminiscing about old ski trips and the funny thing Lily said last week to notice I was doing the dishes. My fingers were pruning by the time they finished opening presents. Nobody offered to help. No one said thank you. Before I left, Mom kissed my cheek absently and said, "You've always been so dependable, Savannah. We're lucky to have you." As if I were the family's old sedan, reliable, invisible, expected to run forever without maintenance. That night, I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time. The porch light flickered. Through the front window, I saw Chelsea curled up on the couch with Mom, showing her photos from their beach trip. Dad was already dozing off. Derek had his feet up on the ottoman like he owned the place. And maybe now, he did. The night after Thanksgiving, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch, still in my jeans, replaying the entire evening over and over in my head. Dad's toast, Mom's smile, Chelsea's perfectly timed tears. The sound of silverware clinking at the table while I sat in the kitchen like I was waiting for leftovers. There was this low, dull throb in my chest that wouldn't go away. Around 2 a.m., I got up and opened my laptop. I didn't even know what I was doing at first. Maybe just looking for some proof that I wasn't crazy, that the last 5 years hadn't been something I'd imagined. But as I pulled up bank statements, receipts, and email confirmations, the numbers started to tell a story louder than words ever could. Every mortgage payment, 1,120s, month after month. Home Depot invoices for roofing shingles. The plumber's bill from when the downstairs toilet flooded. Paint for the shutters, mulch for the yard. New lock sets after Dad dropped the keys one too many times. I kept opening files, saving PDFs, compiling screenshots, scrolling back through half a decade of my life in line items. By dawn, it was all there. A digital paper trail that traced every dollar I'd poured into a home that was no longer mine. Total, $72,483.91. I named the file Home Maintenance. 2018 to 2023. Savannah, Monroe PDF, and attached it to an email to my mother. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I wrote a single line in the body of the message. Since it's clear this house is no longer mine, I won't be making further payments. Please consider this my final contribution. I hit send. Then I shut the laptop, walked outside, and sat on the back steps with a cup of gas station coffee. The air was cold and sharp, like it was trying to keep me awake. The next mortgage deadline came and went. I didn't transfer anything. For the first time in 5 years, I let the reminder pass without flinching. No more logging in before dawn on payday. No more adjusting the shop's budget to cover late fees. No more sacrificing oil changes for myself so the house could have a working furnace. At first, I expected a phone call. Something. Anything. But the silence stretched. It was like the moment I stopped paying, I became invisible again. Days passed, then a week, then 2. When Mom finally called, I didn't answer. I stared at the screen as it lit up with her name. The voicemail she left was short, her voice tight but still composed. "Hi, sweetie. I saw your email. We need to talk about this. Call me back." I didn't. Instead, I drove to the lake, parked near the lot where I'd been eyeing a piece of land for years, a quiet corner near Lake Lanier with a view of the water and just enough trees for privacy. I'd always imagined building a small cabin there someday. Nothing fancy, just peace. I stood on the edge of the gravel and looked out over the still water, wondering what it might feel like to have something that was actually mine. The weirdest part? It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the realization that all those years, I hadn't been helping family. I'd been financing someone else's dream while they carved me out of the picture. I'd been the scaffolding while they built a legacy without me. Sending that email wasn't an act of war. It was a quiet goodbye to the role I'd been forced to play. The reliable one. The fixer. The one who keeps giving even when no one says thank you. I didn't need a shouting match. I didn't need to make a scene. I had my proof. And for the first time, I was starting to think about what justice might actually look like. It was close to midnight when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Chelsea. I sat on the edge of my bed, blinking at the screen like it might be a mistake. My thumb hovered over the decline button. But something, curiosity, habit, maybe just old reflex, made me answer. Her voice cracked as soon as she said hello. Savannah? Hey, I know it's late. I didn't know who else to call. I didn't say anything, just listened. It was quiet enough in my house to hear the soft click of the clock on the wall. Derek lost his job, she said, sniffing. It's been rough. The roof's leaking again, and we've tried patching it. But now with Lily's birthday coming up... There was a pause. She let the silence hang. I know we haven't been close, she said. And I know. We hurt you. But Lily's been asking about you. She still calls you Auntie Vanna. She even drew a picture of you yesterday. I closed my eyes. That girl had chubby fingers and a gap-toothed smile that used to light up my worst days. She once climbed into my lap at Christmas and told me I smelled like cookies and motor oil. I loved that kid more than I ever admitted. Chelsea kept talking. We want her to remember that you're part of the family. I thought maybe, if you could help us get the house fixed up a bit before her party. Nothing big, just help us make it special. There was the hook, buried under all that sentiment, an ask. I didn't answer right away. I walked into the living room, picked up a photo frame I hadn't touched in years. Lily at age 3, frosting on her nose, clinging to my arm like I was the most important person in the world. I sat down, stared at the rug. Chelsea's voice came through the phone again, this time softer. If you can't, I understand. I just thought I'd ask. I should have said no. I should have hung up and gone to sleep. Instead, I opened my banking app. The roof, if it really was leaking, wouldn't be cheap. And I knew Chelsea wouldn't ask unless she'd already tried other options. Or maybe she had and I was just Plan C, $9,500. I stared at the number, then added a note. For Lily's birthday, because we're still family. I pressed send. And just like that, it was gone. The last bit of savings I'd tucked away for my own cabin project. The deposit I'd planned to use to clear the land up near Lake Lanier. I stared at the confirmation screen until it faded out on its own. The next morning, I didn't hear from her. No thank you, no confirmation that the money arrived. Just silence. But I didn't chase it. A small part of me still hoped. Maybe the party would be something real. Maybe I'd get to see Lily's eyes light up again. Deep down, though, a quieter voice whispered, "You know better." Still, hope has a funny way of lingering. It wears disguises, memories, childhood nicknames, a framed drawing on your fridge. It clings to the corners of love that haven't been entirely burned out. That night, I fell asleep with the phone still in my hand. Not because I expected a call, but because somewhere, beneath all the cracks, I still wanted to believe I mattered to someone in that house. The morning of Lily's birthday party, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the small wooden truck I'd built by hand. It wasn't much, just pine wood, sanded smooth and painted sky blue, with her name etched along the side in blocky, uneven letters, Lily. I'd spent 3 weekends shaping and carving it between brake jobs and oil changes, thinking maybe, just maybe, something from my hands would still mean something to that little girl. I showed up 15 minutes early, holding the gift in a brown paper bag tied with a string. The backyard looked like something out of a catalog. String lights zigzagged from tree to tree, Balloon arches framed a bouncy castle, and catering staff were already setting up trays of pastel-colored cupcakes. No one noticed me when I walked through the side gate. Not even Chelsea, who stood near the deck with a glass of rosé in one hand and a phone in the other, air-kissing a woman in a linen jumpsuit. I caught her eye for half a second, but she looked away like she hadn't seen me. A man in a black polo shirt, probably one of the event staff, approached and asked, "Are you with the delivery?" I blinked. "Number I'm family." He looked confused for a beat, then shrugged and pointed toward the far end of the yard. "You can sit over there until they need you." Over there turned out to be a flimsy plastic chair next to 2 trash bins and a stack of folded cardboard boxes. No table, no place setting, no shade. Just the smell of potato salad and sour juice wafting from a nearby bag of garbage. I stood there for a long moment, unsure if I should leave or laugh. Then I sat. Because for some reason, I still wanted to see Lily's face. Chelsea finally walked by, adjusting the hem of her sundress and checking her reflection in the sliding door. She noticed me at the last minute and offered the kind of smile you save for strangers at the grocery store. "Oh, you came. I figured you'd be too busy." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What was there to say? She kept walking. From where I sat, I could see the kids gathering near the cake table, and Lily, now 7, laughing as someone handed her a balloon animal. She looked taller, more grown up. She didn't glance my way once. I reached into the bag and took out the truck, ran my thumb over the letters. Then I stood up, placed it gently on the chair, and walked out the same way I came. No one stopped me, no one noticed. As I drove home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt weightless, like something inside me had finally snapped free. That chair, the one next to the trash cans that wasn't just a seat. It was a message. Loud, clear, and deliberate. I wasn't part of their picture anymore. I wasn't even background noise. I was disposable. But they'd forgotten one thing. Sometimes, the people you push to the side are the ones holding the receipts, and I had every last one of them. I never thought I'd find myself pacing outside a law office with a manila folder tucked under my arm, heart pounding like I was walking into a courtroom on TV. But there I was, staring up at the glass-paneled door that read, Cortez and Beckman, LLP, Family and Civil Law. It was a modest building, tucked behind a dry cleaner and a Thai restaurant, but it might as well have been the threshold of war. Inside, the walls were lined with legal books and framed certificates, all tidy and precise, just like Diane Cortez, who greeted me with a firm handshake and calm eyes that had clearly seen more than her share of family betrayal. She listened without interrupting as I laid out everything: the mortgage payments, the repairs, the Thanksgiving dinner, the birthday money. Her face didn't change, not even when I showed her the final transfer labeled for Lily's birthday, because we're still family. "That," she said, tapping the note, "will be their entire argument. They'll try to paint you as a generous aunt. But generosity without consent is not a legal shield, especially not when it's covering over exploitation." I handed her the flash drive I'd prepared. Every receipt, every email, every photo of a paintbrush in my hand or a ladder against that house. The file name was clear: Mortgage Legal Support, SavannahMonroe.zip. Diane smiled faintly. "You've done your homework. This isn't charity. This is theft disguised as family tradition." The next step was what Chelsea called a family sit-down, an attempt to talk things out without making it messy. Only this time, she brought along an attorney of her own, a slick guy in cufflinks who looked more suited to divorce settlements than backyard betrayal. We met at my parents' house, in the same living room where I once helped install a new ceiling fan during a heat wave. Now it was turned into a sterile negotiation zone, with folders on the coffee table and the air thick with rehearsed empathy. Chelsea started first, her voice syrupy. "Savannah, we're really sorry it's come to this. We never meant for you to feel left out." Her lawyer chimed in. "But legally, your contributions appear to be gifts, especially considering the most recent $9,500 transfer labeled clearly as a birthday gift." I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag and handed Diane the printout of my itemized statement, 5 years' worth of payments and repairs, each with a timestamp, a receipt, and a before and after photo. Then, the kicker. A scanned note from Mom, handwritten in shaky cursive saying, "Savannah, thank you for keeping this home standing. One day, this house will be yours." Diane slid the papers across the table, slow and deliberate. "This isn't a gift. This is a pattern. And your client benefited knowingly." Mom looked at me like she was seeing someone new. Not the daughter who quietly fixed the sink, but the woman who'd built a legal case while they toasted marshmallows in her silence. Chelsea's eyes darted toward her lawyer, but he had no quick comeback. The room fell into an awkward hush, filled only by the hum of the air conditioner and the clink of a coffee spoon in someone's cup. Then Diane delivered the final blow. "Loyalty is not an unlimited contract, and family obligation does not excuse financial exploitation." No one said anything for a long time. Dad stared at the rug. Mom looked at her hands. Chelsea kept flipping through the documents, as if she might find a loophole hiding between the pages. I stood up, gathered my copies, and nodded to Diane. "We'll be in touch." As we walked out, Diane whispered, "They thought you'd be emotional. You were strategic. That changes everything." And for the first time in years, I felt the balance shift, not just legally, but emotionally. I wasn't begging to be included anymore. I was done knocking on the door. I was holding the keys to something more powerful. The truth. Written down, notarized, and backed by every dollar they once pretended didn't matter. The courtroom wasn't anything like I'd imagined from TV. No dramatic wood paneling or marble floors. Just linoleum tiles, fluorescent lights, and the faint scent of old paperwork. But it still felt like stepping into a battlefield. Only this time, I wasn't here to defend myself. I was here to demand what was rightfully mine. Our case was placed on the docket as item 14. Monroe v. Caldwell, printed in clean black ink on the screen outside the hearing room. Savannah Monroe. That was my name. Not Vanna, not the mechanic daughter, not the one who pays quietly. Today, I was the plaintiff. Diane looked over at me, calm and focused. "This is the part where they realize you're not bluffing." When the hearing started, the judge didn't waste time. He went straight to the matter. Our petition for asset protection and a full review of ownership transfer, supported by documented financial contribution. Diane stood and began to outline the evidence: the 5 years of mortgage payments in my name, the home repairs, the email correspondence, the verbal assurance from my mother captured in a handwritten note. Opposing counsel tried to interrupt, citing family assistance and lack of formal agreement. But Diane cut through it smoothly. My client's contributions were substantial, sustained, and directly benefited the property now held under the defendants' names. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's financial abuse wrapped in familial trust. That's when the twist hit. The judge turned to Chelsea and Derek. "Are you aware that transferring a property between related parties, where one has contributed financially, requires disclosure if the asset is leveraged?" Chelsea fidgeted in her seat. Derek stared at the table. Their lawyer stood to respond but hesitated. Diane didn't wait. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe that the property was used as collateral for a $20,000 personal loan, acquired after title transfer, with no disclosure to my client, who funded the property's upkeep." A rustle of whispers broke out in the room. Even the court clerk looked up from her notes. Chelsea's voice cracked. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. Derek lost his job, and we needed the car to keep things afloat. Did you inform my client that the house, maintained on her dime, was being leveraged for unrelated personal investments? Diane asked sharply. Chelsea didn't answer. Her lawyer requested a recess, but it was too late. The judge had heard enough. This court recognizes grounds for temporary injunction. Effective immediately, the property in question is to be frozen from sale, refinance, or further borrowing until full financial review is completed. Defendants are to submit a complete financial disclosure within 10 business days. The gavel fell, and just like that, the tide shifted. Mom was seated behind them, arms crossed so tight her knuckles were pale. She hadn't spoken to me since the Thanksgiving dinner. Now she sat motionless as the truth unraveled in front of her. When the $20,000 figure was read aloud, her hand flew to her mouth. I turned, only briefly, to glance her way. Her eyes met mine for a split second. No words, just a fragile mix of shock, guilt, and something I couldn't quite place. Maybe finally, recognition. When we stepped outside the courthouse, Diane handed me a copy of the injunction notice. You just made it real, Savannah. They can't pretend anymore. I didn't smile. Not yet. But there was something lighter in my chest. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, finding its place in the open air, under oath, where no amount of charm or gaslighting could twist it into something else. As we walked down the courthouse steps, I said the one thing that had been circling in my heart for weeks. I'm not asking for the house back. I'm asking for justice for the 5 years they pretended I didn't matter. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse felt different, heavier somehow. Maybe it was just me, carrying the weight of everything that had unfolded. 5 years of sacrifice, silence, then finally the strength to speak up. Or maybe it was the anticipation. Everyone knew this hearing would be the turning point. Chelsea and Derek arrived with tight faces and expensive clothes, the kind of polished look meant to impress judges and juries. I sat quietly beside Diane, whose calm was a force field. She handed me the finalized file and whispered, "Stay steady. They're about to make their move." And they did. The moment the judge opened the session, Chelsea's attorney stood and filed a countersuit. Her claim? That I had manipulated our elderly parents into funneling money and assets in my favor. That I had used emotional pressure and my physical proximity during Dad's recovery to influence them into making unfair and undocumented promises. That my mother had signed documents under duress. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a legal play. It was a direct attack on my character, my intentions, my very soul. Diane didn't flinch. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "we request an immediate independent psychological and cognitive evaluation of both Russell and Colleen Monroe to assess their decision-making capacity during the period in question." The judge agreed. A court-appointed specialist would conduct the assessment. We adjourned for the day, and I left that courtroom feeling like someone had poured ice water down my spine. They were really going to drag Mom and Dad into this. And Chelsea, my sister, was willing to paint our parents as mentally incompetent just to win. The results came back 3 days later. Mr. Russell Monroe and Mrs. Colleen Monroe possess full cognitive awareness and demonstrate a consistent, rational understanding of financial and personal matters, the report read. There is no indication of diminished capacity, nor evidence of coercion or manipulation in past decision-making. When Diane submitted the findings to the court, there was a silence so thick you could hear the breath catch in every throat. Chelsea's face drained of all color. She turned to her attorney as if waiting for a lifeline, but none came. She looked lost, like someone realizing the stage lights had turned off and the script no longer mattered. The judge, expressionless, reviewed the new findings and spoke with finality. The court dismisses the countersuit on the grounds of insufficient evidence and malicious intent. The court finds the defendant's claims to be defamatory in nature and awards the plaintiff $18,000 in damages to be paid by Chelsea Caldwell. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I just sat still as the courtroom moved around me like water around stone. Chelsea stood up, visibly shaking, then sat back down. Her lips were pressed into a thin, pale line. Derek reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Mom sat 2 rows behind, stone still. She didn't meet my eyes, but she didn't defend Chelsea either. That told me more than words ever could. As we walked out of the courtroom, Diane handed me a copy of the evaluation and said, "They tried to turn your truth into a lie, but the facts stood taller." Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment, the report still in my hands. I stared at the words over and over. No indication of diminished capacity. It meant my parents had made their decisions of sound mind. They chose what to say, what not to say. They allowed the erasure. They allowed the betrayal. And yet, somehow, I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, like something sticky and invisible had finally been scrubbed off my skin. This chapter wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. My family had tried to cast me out as if I were disposable. Now, in the eyes of the law, I was no longer invisible. I was heard. I was valid. I was done letting love be a leash. By the time the court's ruling went into full effect, it didn't take long for the dominoes to fall. Chelsea and Derek tried to put on a brave face, but behind the scenes, things unraveled fast. They couldn't cover the full damages or the attorney fees. Their credit lines were maxed. The loan Derek had taken out using the house as collateral was now called in full, and no bank was willing to extend another hand. Within a month, a discreet for sale sign appeared in front of the house. It was almost comical. Someone had forgotten to take down the birthday lights still strung across the porch. The lawn, once green and trimmed, now had patches of yellow and dry leaves left uncollected. The house that had once been the crown jewel of family holidays stood quiet and stripped of pride. The selling price was well below market value. A rushed sale to settle debts. Derek had already lost his job. Turns out the tech startup he dumped the house money into had gone under during a wave of restructuring. And just like that, the man who'd once smirked across a Thanksgiving table about owning a family home was packing boxes in silence. Chelsea, I heard, cried when the moving truck came. But not because of the house, because of what it symbolized. The facade of success, of having been chosen, was crumbling. Her life had been built on the illusion of being the favorite, and now she was watching it collapse, piece by piece. My parents weren't spared either. Once the house was sold, the financial fallout touched everyone. My father, Russell, had to vacate the bedroom he once stood in with pride while handing out toasts about family legacy. My mother, Colleen, filled out government paperwork with trembling hands, trying to qualify for subsidized housing. Eventually, they both ended up in a 1-bedroom senior housing unit downtown, clean, small, and bare of the control they once wielded. And me? I didn't take the house back. I didn't even contest for it. One afternoon, I drove past it. Just once. The sign still said, "Sold." A man I didn't recognize was carrying a box through the front door. The porch light had burned out. I didn't stop. I didn't slow. I just nodded to myself. A small, quiet goodbye to the girl I used to be when I still thought love had to be earned through sacrifice. I had no interest in reclaiming bricks or walls that had never sheltered me to begin with. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to let go. The people who had pushed me aside had lost what they held most dear, not because I took it from them, but because they underestimated what it cost to betray someone who built the foundation they stood on. And that house? It wasn't anyone's anymore. It was just a shell. A year later, I stood on the porch of a small wooden cabin overlooking Lake Michigan. It was early morning, the kind where the air smells like pine and the fog hugs the water like an old friend. The kind of morning that doesn't demand anything from you. Inside, on the wooden desk I'd sanded down myself, sat a framed court ruling. Next to it, a weathered photo of me on a ladder, hammer in hand, patching the old roof of my parents' house. I hadn't looked at that picture in months. But now, it felt right to have it here. Like the evidence of a version of myself who gave more than anyone ever saw. Next to the photo was a large sheet of graph paper, creases along the edges from being folded so long. My dream blueprint. The house I would one day build piece by piece when I was ready. Not to impress, not to prove, but simply because I wanted to. The coffee in my mug was still hot. I stepped out to the porch and sat on the swing I'd hung last spring. The wood creaked gently as I moved. I looked out at the lake, endless, quiet, reflecting a sky that no longer felt heavy. I thought of the phrase I'd once written in a message to my mother. I understand this isn't my home anymore. And now I realized it never had been. But this space I carved out on my own, without needing anyone's permission, that was home. No more secondhand affection, no more emotional begging bowls. I didn't need to reclaim anything, because they never truly gave me anything of value in the first place. The last photo in the small album on my desk was of me and Lily. She was holding the little toy truck I'd given her one Christmas, the only present she hadn't tossed aside. I kept that photo not out of sentimentality, but because it reminded me that even in dysfunction, I had always loved with sincerity. I wasn't ashamed of that. I was proud. As the sun rose higher, I smiled. Not the kind of smile that needs to be seen, but the kind that settles deep in your chest. No more plastic chairs. No more corners of kitchens. No more watching others toast to a future they never meant to include me in. I had walked away, not just with dignity, but with clarity. And that was more than they'd ever offered. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones no one sees. Quiet wars of dignity, of standing up for our worth when silence would be easier. But choosing ourselves, even when it means walking away, is never selfish. It's how healing begins. If this story stirred something in you, share your thoughts below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to follow, leave a comment, and subscribe. Your voice, your presence. It truly matters here.